I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. The cafe was empty except for the hiss of the espresso machine and a guy 2 tables over tapping away on his laptop. I slid into my usual corner, the one by the window where the light fell in just enough to show the dust motes floating like tiny, lazy planets. My phone buzzed with nothing important, another group chat I wasn't really following. I let it sit face down. She was at the counter before me, as usual. My friend's mom, 40-something, hair pulled back in that practical bun she always had, coat too big for the weather. I could see the way her hands fidgeted with the strap of her bag as she waited for her order. There was something in the rhythm of her movements that caught me, a tiny sway, like she was counting out seconds without noticing. "Hey," I said when I finally got my courage. My voice sounded small even to me. She turned, eyes lifting briefly, then that faint, polite smile I'd seen before. "Hey, you," she said. Not my name, just you. But it hit me. Anyway, I placed my order without looking at the menu, as if she would notice that I always had the same thing. Black coffee, no sugar. She did. She smiled when she repeated it back. Just that black coffee, no sugar. And I could feel the space between us stretch a little quietly. I sat down and watched her as she moved to the side, waiting for her cappuccino. She glanced at the pastries, then back at her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen in a way that made me want to know what she was thinking. I stared a little too long. She caught me and looked away, but her lips twitched like she almost smiled. The loneliness I carried wasn't loud. It was in the unsent texts I left open on my phone, the way I folded napkins at home, even though they were already folded, the paused thoughts I never finished because no one was listening. Sitting there, watching her trace the rim of her cup with one finger, I felt it again, the quiet pull toward someone who wasn't supposed to notice me this way. I cleared my throat. "Ugh, remember when?" She shook her head gently. "It was just a moment," she said, then laughed softly, the sound almost lost under the coffee grinder. Not teasing, not dismissive, just that little shrug that made everything else feel heavier. I didn't know what to say, so I nodded, letting silence do the work. Her eyes flicked to mine, then back down at her hands. The cap of her thermos clicked closed, and I realized I'd been staring at it for far too long. A few minutes passed. She sipped her cappuccino, eyes briefly meeting mine, then glancing toward the door as if expecting someone. I fiddled with the zipper of my jacket, trying not to imagine her leaving and walking out without a word. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at it, then back at me. "I have to go," she said finally, standing. But before she moved, she paused, just a fraction of a second, long enough for me to catch the way her fingers lingered over the edge of the table. "See you soon?" I asked almost too quietly. She hesitated. Then, in a voice just loud enough to carry across the empty cafe, "Maybe. Don't overthink it." And just like that, she was gone, leaving me with the lingering heat of her coffee cup, the faint scent of vanilla and cinnamon, and a text on my phone from an unknown number. It was just a moment. But maybe not. I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen, and realized I had no idea whether to reply. I ran into her again at the corner bookstore that smelled faintly of old paper and cleaning spray. She was browsing the travel section, holding a thin guidebook in one hand, her thumb pressed along the spine like she was weighing whether to let it go. "You like Italy?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my chest had that stupid flutter. She glanced up, a flicker of surprise, then that same quiet smile. "Used to. Before everything changed," she said. Her words hung in the space between the shelves, half explanation, half confession. I nodded, pretending I understood, though I didn't. We wandered to the cafe next door, a habit forming without either of us noticing. I ordered us tea this time, green, no sugar, and she accepted it with a soft thanks. We sat at a small table, the kind that barely fit 2 people, and she pushed her bag slightly to make room. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, something warm and familiar that made me pause mid-sip. I noticed how her fingers traced the edge of the cup, careful, deliberate, as if she had all the time in the world, though I knew she didn't. "I haven't been to Italy in years," she said, eyes distant. "Your dad, he used to take me with him. Before he left." Her voice faltered. I wanted to say something, anything, but didn't. Instead, I nodded. I get that, I said softly. It wasn't true, but it didn't matter. She looked at me then, really looked for a moment longer than usual. And I felt a strange, hollow pull, like she could see the small, empty spaces I carried, the half-finished thoughts I never shared. We lingered in that silence, the clink of spoons against porcelain marking time. I caught myself imagining scenarios I couldn't act on, holding her hand when she shivered from the cafe's draft, leaning closer to hear a story she might never finish telling. Guilt fluttered at the edges of my chest, quiet and persistent. She was my friend's mom, divorced, older than anyone I'd ever thought about this way. Every thought felt like trespassing. Yet, she laughed softly at something, small, dry humor, and it was enough to make me forget, for just a second, all the reasons I shouldn't feel this way. Do you ever miss things you can't have? I asked almost unintentionally, letting my voice drop. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing in thought. Every day, she admitted. Then she smiled that little private smile, the one that made me feel like I'd glimpsed a hidden part of her world. The moment stretched, delicate, fragile. And then she reached for the sugar jar across the table, brushing her fingers lightly against mine. The touch was so brief, almost accidental, but my chest tightened. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge it, but her hand lingered for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. I swallowed hard, trying to ground myself. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. I thought later, replaying it in my head as I walked home. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. It was Saturday again, that thin gray light slipping through the blinds of my apartment. I wasn't expecting her, never did, but then the knock came. Light, hesitant. I froze, half wondering if I'd imagined it, then heard her voice, soft. Hey, can I borrow your charger? Mine died. I fumbled, searching the drawer, trying not to notice how her coat hung off one shoulder, like she'd shrugged it off without realizing. My hands trembled slightly as I handed it to her. She took it, brushing her fingers against mine for a moment too long. Thanks, she said, not looking up, but the way she lingered in the doorway. I wanted to say something, anything, but my mouth went dry. We stood there, the apartment too small, our silence too loud. I imagined stepping closer, just to see if she'd lean in, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself adjusting a stack of books on the shelf, pretending the world existed beyond her. Your roommate, she said finally. He's not here. Out, I muttered. Short. Too short. I felt my heart thud like an alarm I couldn't turn off. She nodded, glanced around. And then she laughed softly, a little offbeat, like she was nervous. There was a pause, that quiet, dangerous pause. I wanted to reach for her hand, wanted to ask her to stay for tea. But something inside me, honesty, guilt, a mix of both, made me hesitate. I imagined the consequences, my friend's eyes narrowing, the conversations left unsaid, the small betrayals. And yet, her proximity drew me in like gravity, subtle, inevitable. Her coat brushed mine as she moved toward the kitchen counter to plug in the charger. My fingers twitched. My gaze lingered on the line of her neck, the shadow of her collarbone. She noticed, I think because her hand paused, hovering over the plug, then flicked away. I should go, she said, voice quiet, almost unsure. Right, I muttered. Couldn't make it stop. Couldn't make myself move. She turned toward the door, but something, hesitation, curiosity, the pull of the unspoken, made her stop halfway. Our eyes met. Too long. My chest ached. I leaned a fraction closer, and I swear I could see the same thought flicker in her gaze. The moment shattered with the sound of my neighbor's door slamming downstairs. She blinked, like waking from a dream, and stepped back. I guess I better go, she murmured, a faint, almost apologetic smile tugging at her lips. I wanted to reach for her, wanted to say it didn't matter, wanted anything. But I didn't. My hand hovered in the air, useless. She left, leaving the faint smell of her coat behind, a whisper of vanilla and faint musk, and the charger on my counter, a token, a reminder, a quiet trap. I sank onto the couch, staring at the spot where she'd stood. My thoughts trailed off, unfinished. Half a confession, half a question, half a wish. And somewhere in that quiet, I realized she had almost crossed the line. And so had I. It was after work, and I found her sitting on the bench outside the grocery store, hands wrapped around a paper cup that had gone cold. The sky was gray, the street empty enough that every sound felt amplified. The distant rumble of traffic, a dog barking somewhere, her quiet sigh. I slowed my step, unsure if I should sit beside her or just watch. She didn't look up. I waited. The space between us felt stretched, taut, like holding a breath too long. "You didn't come by yesterday," she said finally, without looking at me. Just a statement, but it carried weight. I got caught up," I muttered, my hands stuffed in my pockets, fiddling with the zipper, avoiding her gaze. She laughed, dry, a little bitter. "Caught up, right?" And then silence. I wanted to reach for her hand, just a brush, just to anchor the moment. "I didn't. You seem distant," I said, voice careful. Her shoulders stiffened. She set the cup down on the bench, fingers lingering on the edge. "I don't know what I want," she admitted, soft, almost breaking. And I think maybe that's the problem. My chest tightened. I had imagined her saying it, yes, but not with this calm, fragile clarity. I leaned a fraction closer, not touching, just enough to be close to feel the air between us charged. "I think I care more than I should," I said before I could stop myself, words stumbling out in fragments. "And I know it's wrong, but..." Her hand twitched on the bench, a tiny, unconscious gesture, like she wanted to stop me or let me continue. "It's not simple," she whispered. Eyes down, lips pressed together. We sat like that. The world narrowed to our quiet breaths, the faint scratch of her fingers against the paper cup, the occasional shuffle of leaves at our feet. I imagined all the ways it could go wrong. My friend's face, judgment, her guilt, my hesitation, and yet none of that mattered in that suspended second. Then she shifted, almost imperceptibly, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Maybe it's better if we..." Her voice faltered, and she stopped. The words left unsaid hung in the air, heavier than anything she'd said. I wanted to press, wanted to ask her to finish, to let me know the truth, but my throat was tight. So I stayed still. Her eyes flicked toward mine briefly, searching, questioning, or maybe warning. I could see the conflict etched in the lines of her face, the tension in the tilt of her shoulders. She was holding back something powerful, something dangerous for both of us. I shifted just a fraction closer, feeling the pull that had been growing for weeks. And then she pulled her bag on her lap, leaned back slightly, and looked away. A pause stretched, unbroken, and I realized she had made the first move in retreat. I wanted to speak, to ask the question that hovered between us, unfinished, trembling. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I just let my hands rest on my knees, chest tight, eyes tracing her silhouette against the dimming sky, thinking, how long can I wait before I stop waiting? I texted her that night, thumb hovering over the screen for longer than I care to admit. "Hey, coffee tomorrow." But I couldn't press send. I didn't. The next morning, I saw her at the corner shop again, but not alone. She was talking quietly to a man I didn't recognize, leaning slightly toward him, hand brushing his arm, as if it was normal, ordinary. I froze at the doorway, coffee half forgotten in my hand, and I watched. She laughed, something I hadn't heard before, easy and natural. She noticed me, I think. Or maybe she didn't. Her eyes flicked up, caught mine for a fraction of a second, and then she turned back to the man, oblivious, or maybe deliberately ignoring. My chest ached in a slow, spreading way. I wandered down the aisle, pretending to browse, counting cans of soup, tracing labels with my fingers. All the while, my mind ran in loops. Who is he? Friend? Boyfriend? Ex? Did she tell him about me? Did he know? Could he know? When she finally left, alone again, I felt a tug in my stomach. Not jealousy exactly, more like vertigo. I followed at a distance, trying not to notice the way she moved, the subtle bounce in her step, the way her hair caught the morning light. Later, in my apartment, I opened the messages I hadn't sent. The draft stared back at me like unfinished conversations. I wanted to say / I think I / you. None completed. I tried to remember the last time she had been just with me. But even that memory blurred. That Saturday on the bench, the quiet confession, the fleeting closeness, they felt like fragments of someone else's life. I thought about calling her, but my fingers froze on the phone. Even if I did, what would I say? How could I break through the unspoken boundaries? Her life, messy, complicated, real, was not mine to untangle. I wandered the apartment, stopping by the window, watching the street, imagining she might walk past. That tiny hope, a ridiculous hope, really pulled at something I didn't even know I had left. By nightfall, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I opened it. Not from her. Not yet. My thumb hovered over the screen again, thinking maybe I could answer, maybe I could reach out, maybe, but I didn't. I sat on the couch, letting the silence stretch, letting the empty seat across from me feel like a statement. Not rejection, not acceptance, just pause. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. And somewhere in that quiet, I realized the story wasn't mine to resolve yet. Not until she let me in, or not at all. I found her sitting on the steps outside my building that evening, the street lamp casting a pale circle around her. She wasn't looking at me when I arrived, just twisting the strap of her bag, fingers tight, deliberate. "Hey," I said, voice low. She didn't answer, just tilted her head, the way she always did when she was thinking too much, and I realized she had already decided something, though I didn't know what. I haven't seen you," I started. "Not really." My hands hung awkwardly at my sides. I didn't know if I should. The words faltered and fell away. She finally looked at me. Her eyes, calm but sharp, held all the weight of the weeks we'd spent circling each other. "Maybe you shouldn't have," she said softly, almost to herself, then added, almost offhand, "or maybe you should." I wanted to ask her which one was true, but I swallowed it, knowing that asking could undo everything. We sat in silence for a while. The occasional passing car, a distant bark, the faint rustle of leaves. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just the quiet hum of ordinary life pressing against the edge of something fragile. I said, finally, trying to find a thread of courage I'd misplaced. I wanted to say more, but I stopped, aware that the words carried weight I wasn't sure she'd take. She didn't respond immediately, just let her hand rest on the step beside mine. Not close, not distant, just there. "I know," she said. Soft, simple, precise. Not an answer, not a rejection, just acknowledgement. Her gaze flicked to my hands, then back up, and I felt the tension ease a fraction. The vulnerability had cost me something, a little pride, a little certainty, but in its place a quiet honesty I hadn't expected. I don't want to ruin anything," she murmured. And I understood. Everything we were feeling, all the unspoken moments, had risk. Risk we were both aware of. We stayed there, side by side, letting the quiet stretch. My thumb brushed against the edge of her sleeve, barely, almost accidental, but she didn't move away. She let it happen, as if the gesture alone could carry the meaning we hadn't found words for. Finally, she exhaled a tiny sound and let her hand fall to her lap. "Okay," she said. "Not romantic, not dramatic, just human. Enough." I nodded, almost too slowly, letting the words settle between us. Enough to know that we had been seen, even if nothing had changed yet. Enough to feel the connection we'd been circling for weeks. Enough to know that whatever happened next would be real, because we had acknowledged the quiet truth of it. And for the first time, I felt a small, careful peace, like walking on the edge of something dangerous and stepping back alive. Weeks passed, or maybe months. I stopped counting the days. Our routines shifted in small, unspoken ways. I'd meet her at the corner cafe, almost always at 8:47 a.m., same table by the window. She'd already have her black coffee. I'd have green tea, unsweetened, and we'd fall into the easy silence that felt heavier than words, but lighter than loneliness. The bench outside the grocery store became ours again, though now we sat closer, shoulders brushing when the wind was sharp. She still laughed softly at my half-forced jokes, and I still caught the way her hand lingered on the edge of the cup just long enough to notice. Life wasn't perfect. My friends still dropped by, sometimes asking about homework or weekend plans. She still had obligations, meetings, errands. But those moments, the tiny, everyday fragments, we had learned to fold them into something quiet, durable, something we didn't have to name. One rainy afternoon, I held the umbrella, tilted just enough to let the drops run down the side of her coat, but keep her mostly dry. She looked up at me, eyes half hidden behind glasses fogged from the cold, and smiled. Not the kind that promised forever, not the kind that demanded it, just the kind that said, "I see you, and I'm glad you're here." I realized then that was enough. The stolen mornings, the shared silences, the almost confessions, they had been practiced for this, being present together without rushing or over-explaining. She handed me a napkin torn from the cafe supply, and I noticed her thumb brushing mine. It was an accidental habit now, part of our rhythm. I smiled. "Thea?" I asked. "Green as always." She nodded. We walked back, side by side, our pace slow, as if the city itself had softened for us. I caught myself thinking about the early days, the texts unsent, the bench by the grocery store, the quiet near misses that had felt so urgent, and I marveled at how fragile and how strong all of it had been. Later, sitting on the sofa in my apartment, I watched her stir sugar into her tea, the cup rocking slightly against the table. I realized I didn't need to say anything. She didn't either. The moments, the gestures, the pauses, they spoke for themselves. And as she leaned back, eyes meeting mine, I thought quietly, this is enough. This us is enough. The clock ticked 8:47 again. She sipped her tea, I sipped mine, and for a long while, we let the quiet hum of ordinary life fill the space between us. Not perfect, not dramatic, but real. And sometimes, that's all the love you need.